I'm Linda, a 32-year-old housewife, enduring the callous treatment from my husband Ronald, who has lost his affection for me, all for the sake of our 7-year-old son, Paul. Despite my efforts, my mother-in-law Sarah, who dotes on Ronald, remains cold towards me. The audacity to marry when you can't even prepare a simple meal properly, she scoffs. Ronald, disregarding me, engages in an affair. My wife has lost her femininity, he remarks. To make matters worse, Sarah sells the house that Grandpa had given me, for a mere $200,000. Your house sold for $200,000. Divorce Ronald and disappear now, she demands. However, it is Paul's presence that keeps me going through these trying times. Don't worry, Mom. I have a good idea, he reassures me. I cannot allow myself to wallow in despair forever. For the sake of a brighter future with Paul, I must stay strong. Even if I regret it later, I won't forgive them now. My name is Linda. I'm a 32-year-old housewife. I live with my husband Ronald, who is the same age as me, and our 7-year-old son, Paul. If only I were living a blissful, picture-perfect life, how wonderful would that be? Unfortunately, my life is far from the word happiness. Ronald and I were colleagues at a small company. As we worked together and shared our struggles, we developed a deep connection. At least, that's what I believed at the time. With you, who shares the same values as me, I feel like I could spend my life together, he had said. His words filled me with joy, and I decided to marry him. Our courtship was brief, lasting only about 6 months, but it didn't matter to me. I believed that our relationship was strong enough to compensate for the short time we had spent together. When I told Grandpa about our marriage, he was so overjoyed, as if it were his own happiness. Perhaps that's why he gave us a house and land to live together, for Ronald and me. It was a place filled with memories of him living with Grandma, and so I vowed to Grandpa that I would find happiness there. And so, we got married, believing that a blissful life awaited us. But that didn't happen. Shortly after our marriage, the happy life I had hoped for gradually began to stagnate. I don't know if there was a direct reason for it. But Ronald slowly lost his affection for me. At his request, I became a housewife so that I could focus on household chores. I devoted myself to housework, for the sake of him, who was working hard for both of us. However, he grew colder towards me, despite my efforts. The words of appreciation that were there in the beginning gradually disappeared. I realized it had become definitive after I gave birth to Paul. When I heard stories about husbands changing after childbirth on social media or somewhere, I couldn't believe it. I thought it would never happen to us. I think I'll pass on being with you for a while, Ronald said. He started clearly refusing to have time with me. At first, I wanted to believe it was because he was being considerate of our child. Or maybe he was just too tired from working overtime and wasn't in the mood. But then one time, when Ronald came home late, I noticed something. Huh? I don't smell any sweat on him. Usually, when I got close to Ronald, I could faintly smell his sweat, but that day, I couldn't. It meant that he had a chance to wash away his sweat somewhere. It didn't take me long to realize that he had an affair with someone somewhere and took a shower afterwards so I wouldn't notice. And the days I couldn't smell his sweat increased as Paul grew older. Even though I noticed his infidelity, I couldn't bring myself to confront him about it. Paul was still young, and if we were to get divorced, I couldn't say anything when I thought about that. There was another reason why my idea of marriage was slipping away from me. It was the presence of my mother-in-law, Sarah. Sarah disliked me. You could even say she hated me. Because Sarah doted on Ronald excessively. I was harassed for not being good enough for Ronald. Maybe it was to fill the loneliness of my father-in-law passing away a little while ago. But even so, Sarah would shower me with merciless words as I agonized over it. The audacity to get married when you can't even cook such simple meals. During the day, she would visit our house and continue to berate me. Can't cook, bad at cleaning, bad at raising a child. The complaints about me were unbelievably endless. I feel sorry for Ronald, being married to a woman like this. At first, I honestly reflected on myself and tried to obey, since they were the words of his mom. But as the words piled up, I started to realize how light her scolding was. It became clear to me that it was just a way to pick on me, just idle complaints, when she said those words about Paul. Because Linda is no good, Paul is an idiot too. Even without a parent's favoritism, Paul was a smart and kind child. When I'm feeling down about something, he notices and asks me, "What's wrong?" There's no way such a he could be an idiot. That's not true. Paul is a smart and kind child. I wonder about that. Ronald was much smarter when he was a child. Even when I objected, Sarah wouldn't accept my words. I can endure it when it's about me, but I can't stand it when she says bad things about Paul. So I tried talking to Ronald about her. Hey, about Sarah. It pained me to feel like I was tattling, but I thought Ronald would at least listen seriously if it was about Paul. With that in mind, I talked to Ronald when he came home from work, but I was easily betrayed. If Mom says so, she must be right. It's all because of the way you're raising him, Linda. The only words that came out of Ronald's mouth were in defense of Sarah. And he was laughing with a silly expression on his face. There wasn't a hint of seriousness on Ronald's face, even though it was about his own child. As such incidents piled up, I started to become mentally ill day by day. I would just cry where no one could see me, because it was so painful. Mom, what's wrong? Every time Paul worries about me and calls out to me, I'm reminded that I can't go on like this. I tried my best to smile, at least so that Paul wouldn't worry. And thinking that I wanted him to laugh regardless of what was happening to me, I told Paul many fun stories. At first, they were fairy tales with happy endings. But I only knew a few fairy tales like that. So after a while, I started adding my own twists to the fairy tales I knew. Still feeling like it wasn't enough, before I knew it, I started creating stories from scratch. Mom, your stories are so interesting. You think so? I love how, in the end, all the bad guys are defeated and all the good guys are smiling. Yeah. I wish everything could really be like that. Reality is full of painful things. So I wanted at least the world that he knew to be filled with happiness. I was weaving stories with those feelings in mind. I wish Mom's stories could become picture books. Huh? Then everyone could smile too, I'm sure. Paul's unexpected words made my eyes light up. A picture book author, or a novelist. It might be presumptuous for someone like me to aspire to that, but... yeah, that would be wonderful. If I could at least dream, by holding on to those thoughts, I somehow endured the painful days. Hoping that someday, Ronald and Sarah would change their minds. But reality was just as harsh as ever. Talking with Elizabeth is so much fun after all. She's totally different from Linda. One Sunday, as I returned from shopping, those words reached my ears. I knew that Ronald no longer had any intention of looking after Paul. So I often left Paul with my parents. That day too, I had left Paul with my parents in the morning and was taking care of accumulated shopping and errands. I'd go pick up Paul after putting away the shopping bags. And the moment I returned home, I heard Ronald's words. Not noticing that I had come back, Ronald continued talking loudly to someone on the phone. Linda just isn't feminine anymore, you know? What spilled from his mouth was abuse towards me. And at the same time, praise for Elizabeth, the woman he was having an affair with on the phone. Those were words that had once been directed at me, and as I listened from behind a corner, my chest just ached. I was made to realize that those words were no longer words of love for me. At the same time, I felt the affection I still barely had for Ronald disappearing. Ronald was no longer the husband I had married, but had become someone else. That's why I was able to calmly remember the various bits of information that came up in the conversation. The woman named Elizabeth apparently works at a certain bar. If I just knew the name of the bar, there were various things I could do. I could talk to her about what to do going forward, and it would be easier to hire a private investigator. It was a complicated situation, but I thought that maybe I could turn things in a good direction. I held on to that faint hope. Sometime after learning about Ronald's blatant affair and the woman he was seeing, I left Paul with my parents and headed to a certain place. It was the bar where Elizabeth worked. Ronald would probably stop by there today too. I had re-examined the days he tended to come home late and predicted the day he would definitely go to the bar. I thought I would barge in there, or follow him, and catch him red-handed in his affair to give myself an advantage. By doing that, I could proceed with a divorce and start a new life with just Paul and me. I was thinking that, when... On the other side of the small crosswalk where I had stopped, there was Ronald. Had he not stopped by the bar? Was he planning to go after taking care of something else? I couldn't think about those things in that moment. Ronald was operating something on his smartphone, proceeding forward while still not paying attention to what was in front of him. The light was still red. A car comes barreling towards him there.
Watch out!
Huh? The affection I had for Ronald in my heart had certainly grown cold. But I didn't want him to disappear from this world. So I reflexively ran and shoved Ronald's body out of the way. Instead, a strong impact ran through my body. Before I could feel any clear pain, I lost consciousness. Where am I? I regained consciousness on a hospital bed. Mom, I'm so glad. Paul. Paul was right next to me, holding my hand. I was crying at the thought of never being able to see Paul again.
I'm really glad, Linda.
Grandpa. I'm sorry for causing trouble for Dad and Mom too. Around the bed where I lay were my grandparents and parents. Apparently, I was lucky enough to only have minor injuries. Everyone was happy that I only needed to be hospitalized for about a month. But Ronald was nowhere to be seen in the hospital room. He couldn't get away from work, that was his excuse apparently. Even though I had saved his life, while everyone else was feeling angry, I was somehow calm. Knowing about his affair, I couldn't think any other way. It was refreshing to clearly know how he felt. Thinking that, I spent my hospital stay entrusting Paul to my parents and grandparents, and then one day, a week before I was finally set to be discharged.
Why from Sarah?
Suddenly, I got a call from Sarah on my smartphone. Until now she had never once come to see me while I was hospitalized. I couldn't possibly think she regretted that. I answered the phone with a vaguely bad feeling. Is this Sarah?
So you were still alive? How lucky for you.
My faint hope that she would thank me for saving Ronald's life was quickly betrayed.
You did something unnecessary. Ronald was laughing about how he could have avoided that accident, and that Linda who got hurt for no reason is an idiot.
I was so astounded by Ronald and Sarah's cruel way of speaking that I couldn't say anything. But Sarah said something that made me lose my words even further.
But thanks to that, I was saved. Because I could search the house slowly. What do you mean?
True to my words, I didn't understand what Sarah was saying. To me, Sarah piled on even more words.
I'm saying I have no more use for you. So, what are you talking about? I can finally say it. Your house sold for $200,000. Divorce Ronald and disappear now.
I was speechless at those unbelievable words. My mouth twitched and I couldn't even string together words. That's how much of a shock it was.
Ronald was happy too. That he could finally cut ties with you and marry a wife suitable for him.
So they were in on it together? I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it. That house, that land, Grandpa had given it to us for our happy life together. And they sold it without permission? I was so shocked that no words came out and I could only move my mouth. But I couldn't stay like that forever. That house is the place for Paul and me to return to. Having collected myself, I somehow managed to string together words.
What do you mean? That house is for our family. It's also the house of your grandson Paul.
But the words I squeezed out weren't enough to sway Sarah. Sarah scoffed at my words and said bluntly,
I don't need a grandson who doesn't take to me. You and Paul can just go live happily together somewhere.
The retort I had built up inside me was blown away by her cruel words that lacked any human compassion.
Well, I'll at least thank you for giving us the $200,000.
And with that, the call from Sarah ended, leaving me at a loss for words once again. What in the world, what should I do? There's no way they could suddenly sell the house like that. Could it be that they had been plotting to sell it for a long time? If so, then me being hospitalized and leaving Paul with my parents, resulting in the house being empty, was very convenient for them. It was a great opportunity for them to thoroughly search for the land and house deeds, that must be it. I don't want to let them do as they please with our house. But I had no idea what to do or how to go about it. At my wit's end, I reached for my smartphone and made a call. It was to Paul, who should have been at my parents' house. Mom, who answered the phone first, must have sensed that something had happened. She asked me worriedly if something was wrong. I told Mom I'd explain the situation later and had her pass the phone to Paul.
Mom, thanks for calling. You're getting discharged soon, right?
Paul spoke to me in such a happy voice. It made me so happy, and yet my chest ached terribly at the thought of making that voice sad now. Even though I had told him so many stories because I didn't want that to happen. But it's something I'll have to tell him eventually. Carrying feelings of apology and pain, I desperately tried to string together words while thinking of how to hurt Paul as little as possible. You know, Paul.
I can be discharged, but our house, your dad and grandma.
Even as I thought it is pathetic. I couldn't string the words together well. But what Paul said to me then was unexpectedly far beyond my imagination.
About the house? It's okay. I have a good idea. Huh?
A clear, bright voice. I'm glad Paul isn't sad, but honestly, I have no idea what he means. Probably trying to encourage my confusion, he told me in a voice that I could tell he was smiling.
Dad had been talking on the phone about doing something with the house for a while now when he was home.
So they had been plotting to sell the house for a long time after all. I was ashamed of my own carelessness for not noticing it at all. Maybe I had been too preoccupied with the thought of divorce.
So I thought it would be a problem if we lost the house, and I tried talking to great-grandpa about it. And then,
he was trying his best to explain it to me. But it must have been difficult for him to fully explain all the details about the land and the circumstances of adults. I could hear my mom's kind voice saying,
"I'll explain,"
from the other end of the phone. It might not have been the right situation, but I felt comforted by their exchange. As my frantic heart calmed down, Paul told me firmly, albeit clumsily,
"So Mom, there's nothing for you to worry about. Just focus on getting better at the hospital and come home."
My chest just grew hot with his kindness. Wiping away the tears that had started flowing without me noticing, I told him, desperately trying to suppress my trembling voice so as not to worry him further.
"Yeah, I'll definitely come home. Just wait a little bit longer, okay?" "Yeah."
I felt like I got the greatest energy and courage from his lively response. I can't stay down forever. I have to do my best for a bright future with him. And everything that my mom explained to me about what had happened so far seemed to support my determination. 1 week later, I was discharged from the hospital as scheduled and headed home, greeted by Paul, my parents, and Grandpa. I'm so glad. There, looking up, was our house, unchanged. The flower beds and modest decorations I had made to liven up the house were still there, and I felt truly relieved. They must have sensed my relief.
"Yeah, I'm glad."
Paul said that and held my hand tightly. Paul, who had just started elementary school not long ago, seemed to have grown up so much more than I thought, and I felt like I might cry. My parents and Grandpa seemed to be tearing up too, following suit. What's wrong? Seeing us crying, Paul made a worried face. Gently stroking Paul's head, I said,
"It's okay. We're not crying because we're sad. You know, sometimes people cry when they're happy too."
Really? Is that true?
To tell you the truth, as you get older, you end up crying a lot more than when you were a child.
I see. It was in a moment like that, as we were smiling at each other. At the intense ringtone that disturbed the peace, I took out my smartphone. The name displayed was Sarah's.
"Who's calling?"
It's Sarah. When I answered that, Grandpa's face was filled with anger.
"You can ignore it. We'll take care of everything else."
The thought of giving in to those words crossed my mind. Honestly, I never wanted to see Sarah or Ronald again. With that thought in mind, I ignored my ringing smartphone for a while. But then it occurred to me that if I left it alone, this might go on forever. Considering Paul's future, I wanted to settle unpleasant matters quickly and completely. So I signaled to Grandpa and the others with my eyes, gained courage by looking at Paul one last time, and answered the phone. Hello.
"Hey, you finally picked up."
On the other end of the phone, Sarah, whom I was speaking to for the first time in a week, sounded not at all at ease. Rather, she sounded so flustered and panicked that I almost laughed a little. Sarah, who couldn't possibly notice my expression, shouted at me.
"What is the meaning of this? What are you talking about?"
There seemed to be some kind of commotion on the other end of the phone, and it was noisy. Sarah answered in an even louder voice.
"Your house, I sold it, so why hasn't it been sold?"
Perhaps because she was so confused, Sarah's words were incoherent and hard to understand. So I honestly voiced my thoughts as they were.
I don't really understand what you're saying." "I'm saying the house I sold hasn't been sold."
Was she also indignant that I was calm no matter what? Sarah shouted, getting even more emotional.
"Just come here. You have an obligation to explain, don't you?" "No. I have no obligation to explain." "What?"
It must have been an unexpected response. After all, until last week, I could hardly argue back against Sarah's words. But I can't stay silent any longer. From now on, for the sake of my and Paul's future, I'll argue back with all my might.
Rather, it's you who should explain. You tried to sell my house without permission. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous. The house is in my name, not Ronald's.
That's right, Grandpa gave us the house, but the title is in my name. At the very least, neither Ronald nor Sarah have the right or qualification to sell the house. Even if they tried to take the documents without permission, that shouldn't waver no matter what. Faced with my resolute rebuttal, Sarah couldn't find the words to respond. Since I have the chance, I'll ride this momentum and settle everything.
Sarah, where are you right now? Is Ronald with you by any chance? At the real estate agent. Because the house I sold hasn't been sold.
I see, so that's why they were causing a commotion, I understood.
This isn't going to get us anywhere, so please come to the house with Ronald.
The real estate agent had done something regrettable. As a result, they got involved in our house's circumstances and caused trouble. I decided in my heart that I would properly apologize to them later, and then I told Sarah.
So that we don't cause any more trouble for the real estate agent. What a way to put it! Fine. I'll make sure to talk to them and have you apologize.
With that, she hung up on me. I conveyed the flow of events to my parents and grandparents and told them of my determination to settle various things today. Then, my parents promised to cooperate if it was necessary for them to be present. Honestly, it felt very reassuring. If it were up to me, it might be something I should end by myself. But since Paul's future is also at stake, I'm sure that borrowing their strength is the surest way to end everything today for certain. That's another reason why I asked them to be present. I was thinking of having Paul leave the room.
I'll help out properly too.
But he kept insisting that he wanted to be with me no matter what. In the end, I accepted his words. But only after making him promise to leave the room if the conversation got too terrible. Before long, Ronald and Sarah and the others arrived at the house. Ronald, Sarah, and even Elizabeth, the woman he was having an affair with. Well, I guess it's not strange if Ronald intends to marry her. Ronald and the others seemed unable to hide their surprise at the presence of my parents and Grandpa. Feeling a sense of guilt, or rather, a perplexed expression at the difficulty of the situation, I showed them to the living room. I didn't want to let them in the house, but I had no choice, as I couldn't trouble others by doing this somewhere else.
So, explain what's going on.
In the end, perhaps anger won over confusion, and Sarah spoke first.
I'm sure I sold this house, so why? It seems so. But we had the buyer take a different house. That's all there is to it.
It was Grandpa who answered Sarah's question. To Sarah and the others, who were puzzled by the unexpected response, Grandpa explained. Actually, Grandpa is a landlord who manages several plots of land in this area. Because Paul had consulted with Grandpa about our situation, Grandpa had spoken to the real estate agent in advance. Namely, if a situation arose where they were going to sell this house, they should report it to him. And so, when it actually came to the point of being sold, Grandpa contacted the person considering purchasing the house. He pleaded with them to give up on this house, offering a plot of land not far from here with better conditions at the same price. The prospective buyer agreed, seeing no reason to refuse if the conditions were better. In the end, the sale of this house was cancelled, and Sarah and the others, unaware of this, were rejoicing without realizing it.
That's way too arbitrary. That's right. We were going to have a luxurious wedding and go on an overseas trip with the money from selling the house.
The two voiced their dissatisfaction at Grandpa's explanation. I couldn't stand the two of them.
You're the ones being arbitrary. Aren't you ashamed of selling someone else's house and land on your own and trying to turn it into money?
Elizabeth let out a scream at my intensity and shrank back.
Linda?
On the other hand, Ronald seemed shocked that I, who had always done as he said until now, was defying him. He had a stupid expression on his face, as if he were taken aback. But perhaps thinking that he couldn't stand being beaten, he immediately raised his voice.
There's no reason to be ashamed. That's my house. I explained, didn't I? That house is in my name. You have no right to sell it. Speaking of the house documents, Could it be that you were forging them?
No matter how much they say they have documents, if someone with a different name than the titled owner tries to sell the house, naturally someone should stop them. For them to proceed to the point of sale without such a stop, wouldn't it be impossible without forgery? As if it should be expected, Sarah and Ronald's faces turned pale at Grandpa's question.
I'll tell you now, forging documents is a crime. The punishment is severe. Shut up! What's the problem with me selling what's mine?
Despite it being obvious that there were only problems, even at this point, Ronald didn't stop intimidating me.
Linda, you get it, right? You can't live without me. Don't you dare file a lawsuit or anything. That's right, if you sue us or anything, you won't be able to live. That's not true. She is a strong girl. If she puts her mind to it, she can properly live on her own.
That's right. Unlike Dad, who only make complaints. Along with Grandpa's words, Paul also raised his cute and powerful voice.
Mom is strong. She worked hard every day, no matter what.
Oops, since Paul is here too, I guess it's two people. Sorry. The housework and childcare that Ronald had always abandoned. Paul had properly watched me continue to face them. Here are Grandpa's words, he who had watched Paul and me since we were young, and my parents who raised me, nodding vigorously even without words. I had nothing to fear anymore. Ronald and Sarah, whom I had endured so much, seemed weak, as if I had been a fool.
If anything, you're the ones holding Linda back from living happily. It's not embarrassing at all for us to help out a little with the part you've been holding her back on.
Grandpa and my parents were offering to help until I could properly stand on my own. Specifically, taking care of Paul and supporting our life. And I knew it wouldn't be for very long.
And thankfully, I already have a prospect for work. What? You don't know this, but I've been making up various stories and telling them to Paul. And what about it? I got some advice from Paul. I'm thinking of becoming a picture book author.
I can't draw illustrations, but there were a few open calls for just picture book stories. With encouragement from Paul, I applied, and surprisingly, I was selected. I had already received prize money and several job offers. Because I was hospitalized, the progress was delayed a bit, but the editor kindly forgave me.
When I applied for various things, I was given the opportunity to create a book this time. I don't know how it will turn out yet, but I have work for a while.
Then I took a deep breath and said what I hadn't been able to say for so long.
So, Ronald, divorce me. If you don't agree, I'll sue you in court. What? Wait a minute.
At my words, the two were more upset than ever.
Sarah, didn't you tell me to divorce him a week ago? That's...
Sarah must know. If we divorce now, Ronald will have to pay compensation and child support in the divorce trial. I think she believes she can't let her precious son bear such a burden, so she can't let us divorce. But it must have been pretty hard for her to ask me, whom she had looked down on so much. Ronald and Sarah twisted their expressions, looking utterly vexed.
Wait. What about marrying me? And you said you'd give me money too. Shut up. Be quiet for a bit, you stupid woman. What? What's with that attitude? Just because you paid me money, you think you can act all high and mighty if I'm nice to you. Ugh, you're so annoying.
At this point, the three had lost their unity. Why was Sarah approving of Ronald's marriage to Elizabeth in the first place? Maybe Ronald was lying about her occupation or something, but I'm not interested. I simply stated what I had to say.
I'll say it again. Do you want to divorce me or not agree to the divorce and be sued? Which do you prefer? Hey, Linda. Wait a minute.
At this point, Ronald suddenly softened his voice. His aim was clear. He was trying to get me to show him some compassion. Didn't we love each other so much back then? I've reflected on my actions, so one more time.
You guys, stop messing around already.
Irritated by Ronald's pathetic appearance, I shouted. It must have been more impactful than I thought, because the three were surprised and trembling. To the three of them, I told them without hesitation.
I've been waiting all this time. For you two to reflect on their actions. There's no way I can forgive everything now. So there are no second chances. Now it's either divorce or not. So which is it?
I was wrong. Just don't sue me, please.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
forgive me." The three completely trembled at my intensity and begged for forgiveness. Seeing their state, I felt a sense of relief and regained some composure, saying,
"Then let's go with divorce. Of course, I'll properly receive the compensation and child support from the divorce trial." "Hey, that's a bit too much." "Fine, I got it."
When I glared at Ronald, who was about to complain again, he immediately changed his mind.
"All right. Since we've come to an agreement, let's put it in writing. I don't want you complaining later."
After Grandpa wrapped up the conversation like that, the three of them properly signed a written oath. To divorce, to give me custody, to pay compensation and child support. In the divorce trial, everything turned out just as I had hoped. Some time passed after that. After finishing some post-processing, Ronald and I successfully divorced. The fact that the life I thought was so happy at first had completely changed is still a bitter memory even now. But even so, I won't deny that there was a time when I was happy. It's because of that time that Paul was born into this world. So I had no regrets about what had happened. But it seems Ronald and the others weren't like that. It seems Ronald had been paying Elizabeth far more money than I had thought. He had fallen into a state of serious financial shortage, and then the compensation and child support from the divorce trial piled on top of that, making it impossible for him to come up with the money. Elizabeth gave up on Ronald because of the abusive language during the discussion and because he ran out of money. But it seems her boss at the store found out about this incident. That person was a sensible one, and therefore couldn't forgive Elizabeth for causing trouble for a family, so he fired her. And because that person had a strong influence, she could only flee and go somewhere else, unable to work in the surrounding area. The place where Elizabeth told Ronald she was breaking up with him was the lobby of Ronald's company. It became known to those around him that the cause of Ronald's divorce was an affair, causing a commotion. Unbelievably, it seems he had been telling people at the company that he was a devoted husband. As a result, unable to endure the cold stares from those around him, Ronald quit his job and became a shut-in at home. Even for someone like him, it seems it's an undeniable fact that he's still Sarah's precious son. She seems to be working all day to pay the compensation and child support from the divorce trial in Ronald's place. However, troubles never cease due to her personality, and it seems she doesn't last long at jobs. As a result, the mental and physical burden piles up, and it's said that she's been getting into fights with Ronald more often due to stress. I think this is going too far, so I'm thinking of going to give Ronald a proper lecture about working soon. As for us, we're spending peaceful and happy days in the house we managed to avoid selling. The sales of the published picture book are quite good, and I'm relieved that I'll be able to become independent sooner than I imagined. My parents and grandparents love Paul so much that they seem willing to take care of him regardless of that. The happiness I was able to regain thanks to my warm and reassuring family. I think I'll work even harder so that I can share it with everyone. By the time we had been married for 10 years, my mother-in-law, Mary, who holds biased values, committed an utterly foolish act. Sure, there's a significant age difference between Mary and I, so it's possible that something I said without thinking might have upset her. But Mary did the one thing she should never do. She acted in a way no educator should towards my daughter, Ellie, her granddaughter. At the time of the incident, I was so focused on caring for Ellie's mental well-being that I put my feelings aside, but now I'm writing this as a way to sort out my own thoughts as well. Mary's biased values likely came from her ex-husband, Mike. I heard he cheated on her with another woman right after my husband, John, was born, leading to their divorce. With the help of her parents and relatives, Mary managed to raise her 2 children, Jane, my sister-in-law, and John. I felt sympathy for her struggles up to the point and even admired her as a strong person. However, Mary became a misandrist because of Mike. It seems she had been deceived by men a few times before, and as a result, John grew up being neglected at home. Mary's family was wealthy, so Jane was sent to tutoring and extracurricular activities, but John was told, "It's a waste to spend money on you," and was allowed to do nothing. As a result, Jane graduated from a prestigious private university, entered a major corporation, got married, and even after having children, she worked full-time. Mary was proud of Jane and would only talk about her achievements at family meetings. On the other hand, John graduated from an obscure, low-ranked university and became a salesperson at a small to medium-sized company. Despite growing up in such an unfavorable environment, John has high social skills and a cheerful personality. He's doing well at his company, earning a higher salary through incentives. I know this because I worked in sales administration at the same place as John before we got married. I respect John, yet when we went to a family meeting, Mary looked down on him and said, "He's such a sloppy child. He's inferior compared to Jane." I snapped in that moment and retorted, "I don't think so at all." I still remember Mary glaring at me with a stern look, even 10 years later. Right then, I knew Mary had taken a dislike to me. The first thing she asked me was, "Which university did you graduate from? And where do you work now?" I had heard about mother-in-law getting angry about their daughter-in-law working, thinking I'd be told to focus on household duties. But that wasn't the case. I planned to support John by taking care of the household and working a part-time job so he could earn through sales. When I explained this to Mary and told her about my university and workplace, she said, "I've never heard of such a university. In this day and age, women should work too." I had a teaching qualification, so I managed to raise my children until they were adults. You should be grateful that you can work and do so as an employee. Don't depend on men for everything. I was dumbfounded. John is working hard, so I want to do my best at home to make our house a more comfortable place. I think I can support us financially with a part-time job as well." When I countered her argument, Mary became red with anger and lashed out. "How is that going to work? Women like you are hindering the advancement of women in society. You should be ashamed." She lectured me. After that, Mary introduced me to a relative's company, where I ended up working as a full-time employee. What Mary always used to say to me was, "Jane is smart and capable, but you and your husband are both hopeless." I thought it was normal for a mother-in-law would be happy when her son has a child. But maybe it wasn't novel anymore since Jane already had children. When I announced my pregnancy, "Even if you too have a child," Mary said with a sigh. I was infuriated, but realizing that Mary really doesn't care about John, I felt more sadness than anger. Though it seemed John had never had any expectations from Mary in the first place. "Well, for me, it's a precious child made with my beloved wife." "Don't say things like that," he said. I asked John regarding Mary's lack of joy over her grandchild, and he said, "Maybe once the baby is born, Mom's feelings will change. Jane is working, so she can't see Jane's kids much either." So, I decided to think of Mary as a tough love type. For example, when she said, "You went to a low-level university just like David. Failing to study seriously when you're young leads to becoming a failure." I would shift my thinking to, "You could have gone to a better university if you had tried harder. What a waste of talent." So, whatever Mary said didn't really affect me much. When Jane's child was born, Mary was overjoyed. She was present at the birth and visited Jane's house frequently. She spent $10,000 on baby gifts and necessities. When she bought a $5,000 stroller, I was amazed that such a world existed. However, when Ellie was born, Mary didn't come to the hospital to see Ellie, she said. "Spending money on your daughter is a waste." I felt uncomfortable and didn't ask for a baby shower gift. John seemed unhappy too and didn't mention it at all. Instead, Jane gave us a crib, baby items, and things I needed. I think Jane is a very good person. Feeling guilty because my gift wasn't as expensive, I said on the phone, "I'm very grateful, but I can't accept all this. I haven't sent Jane nearly as much." To which she replied,
"It's also to thank Mom for taking care of her. She hasn't been nice to you, right? Consider it compensation for that, so don't worry about it."
Jane is such a wonderful person. I wondered how she was raised by Mary. I felt saved by Jane's kindness. Maybe John grew up cheerful despite being disliked by Mary because of Jane's presence. Though we didn't receive a gift from Mary, the warmth from Jane's generosity made up for it. So, even if Mary doesn't dote on Ellie as a grandmother, we decided to love Ellie all the more. But once childcare began in earnest, I found myself busy with parenting at home every day. Mary then turned to me and John, saying,
"People like you shouldn't have children. Without that child, you could have been earning more and might have even had a higher position in your company."
Even John couldn't let that pass and retorted,
"Of course, children come first. I think having a lot of money means nothing if you're spiritually poor. We are working hard every day for Ellie. Take back what you said."
After that, Mary fell silent and stopped meddling in our ways. Even as Ellie grew up and started talking, Mary stubbornly refused to show her any affection. If we gathered at the in-laws for Christmas, Mary blatantly favored Jane's child, David, sitting him on her lap and ignoring Ellie even if she approached, showing a smile but not the same affection. Despite not really caring, in front of Jane, she pretended to show interest in Ellie. Jane, loving children, would likely be upset if she saw Mary being cold to Ellie. By the way, Mary never even smiled at Ellie. But Ellie was confused to see cold Mary becoming kind when Jane's family visited. Mary thinks men are betrayers, valuing Jane while unable to like John. Yet, she adores Jane's child. Believing a child raised by Jane couldn't grow up to betray women, whereas our child, Ellie, is irrelevant to her. Mary believes Ellie won't get into a good university because John and I graduated from low-tier colleges. So, when David started elementary school, she gave him a $20,000 entrance gift. I half expected nothing for Ellie's entrance gift, but surprisingly, Mary gave her a backpack. And said,
"If she's going to the school where I'm the principal, she needs to use something decent, or it'll embarrass me. Don't let her look poor, okay? I'd be the one ashamed."
That's what it seems. Indeed, the backpack Mary gave appeared to be from a renowned brand, but Ellie had her eye on another backpack. Seeing it at a shopping mall we frequently visit, she happily said,
"I want to go to school with that backpack."
So, I suggested buying that backpack for Ellie, but she said,
"Grandma bought this one for me, so it would be sad not to use it."
And so, I decided to respect Ellie's wishes. While I'm not ungrateful to Mary, I wish she had consulted us before purchasing. One day after school started, Ellie came home acting strangely. Just sitting on the sofa staring at the TV instead of talking about her day as usual.
"What's wrong, Ellie? You seem down. Did something happen at school?"
Her reply was shocking. "I couldn't eat lunch today."
"Are you sick? Do you have a fever?"
Checking her forehead, I found no sign of fever. "No, the teacher said there was no lunch prepared for me today."
"Was there an issue with the lunch? I didn't receive any notices."
"No, everyone else had theirs. But there was none for me."
"Huh."
I was stunned by Ellie's words. Her lunch was the only one not prepared? What could that mean?
"Ellie, did something happen at school today?"
"No, not really. I got along with my friends, and I even got good marks on the test I got back." Saying this, Ellie pulled out a test paper with a perfect score from her backpack.
"That's great. You worked hard on the test. You must be hungry since you didn't have lunch, right? How about we celebrate your perfect score with some delivery pizza today?" "Really? Yay!"
Needless to say, Seeing Ellie's smile return lifted my spirits a bit. But the problem wasn't solved. I messaged John.
I have something I need to discuss about Ellie, so please come home early today.
When we put Ellie to bed, John came home. I shared with John what I had heard from Ellie. It's possible that Ellie caused some trouble and her teacher got angry, but not serving her lunch was not right. That was our perspective as a couple. The next day was the weekend, so we left Ellie at my parents' and headed to the in-laws together.
Mom, Ellie came home yesterday without having lunch. Did something happen at school?
There's a huge problem.
As expected, children of parents who graduated from low-tier universities just aren't good.
Ellie is a liar. She cheated.
What? Cheated? What do you mean?
That's what the teacher reported. Ellie cheated on a test. According to Mary, the test Ellie scored perfectly on was supposedly not one a first grader could ace, and Ellie was suspected of cheating. The teacher asked Ellie to be honest, but Ellie insisted she had figured it out herself.
Where's the problem in that? Is there even proof she cheated? All the other students couldn't even score 50 on it.
Only Ellie getting 100 points clearly points to cheating. Liars need to be punished. So, I punished her. I had reached my breaking point. The hostility Mary had shown me up until now. I could twist any words directed at me, but malicious actions toward Ellie were unforgivable. John, usually mild-mannered, felt the same. As I was about to retort, the living room door opened. There stood Jane, looking furious.
Jane, why are you here?
Mary asked, her voice trembling.
I heard about Ellie and couldn't stay put. I rushed over after hearing you were coming to talk to Mom, and I could hear everything from outside the door, all the disrespectful things you were saying.
Jane's face was an expression of anger, turning Mary's face pale. Then John, glaring at Mary, said,
She's the only mother I have, and I wanted to respect her, but I can't continue a relationship with a parent who treats Ellie this way. I'm sorry, but I'm cutting ties with Mom.
After which Jane added,
I'm disappointed in Mom. I was grateful for how well she treated David, thinking she cared for Ellie the same. Enough with the favoritism. Until Mom reflects, David won't be seeing you,
she said defiantly. I also told Mary.
I could have resigned myself to being disliked as an outsider, but I've always hated how cold you were to John, and it broke my heart to see you being cold to Ellie. I've decided, for Ellie's sake, we won't see you again.
At that, Mary began to panic. I was wrong. I'm sorry. From now on, I'll treat Ellie kindly too, she said, tears in her eyes as she clung to me. Then John stood up for me.
Enough of that. No offense to Mom, but we'll have to discuss this with the education board. Wait. If you do that, Mom punished Ellie without any evidence. It's only natural for us as parents to file a complaint, right? This can't be. Jane, please say something. Mom, if the same thing happened to David, I'd do the same as John. It's the natural action of a parent who has children.
Afterwards, John reported the incident to the education board, and Mary resigned from her position as principal. The teacher who falsely accused Ellie was reprimanded and stepped down from being the class teacher. The reason Ellie scored perfectly on the test was revealed by David. That test is given to first graders every year.
So, I taught Ellie how to solve the problems,
he said proudly. Never underestimate a grade schooler. Ellie has made good friends and goes to school happily every day, and John and I feel much more at peace having cut ties with Mary. Speaking of which, we replaced Ellie's backpack. John said,
There's a kid who really wants Ellie's backpack. Can we give it to them? In exchange, we'll buy the one Ellie has been wanting.
Guiding Ellie cleverly. Her face didn't seem to mind at all, so I was thankful for John's fib. A few months ago, we started living with my MIL, Karen. Even when we lived nearby, she used to harass me, but things escalated after we started living together. Karen's harassment came in two patterns. The first was about my hobby of toll painting. When I displayed my finished pieces at home, she would say, "What's this? This creepy ornament. Where did you get it as a souvenir?" Then hide it in the closet, replacing it with her own paintings, which were far creepier. Next, she found my toll painting kit in my room.
I thought these were some creepy pieces of wood you picked up from the park or somewhere, so I threw them away.
She said, "Would anyone think neatly cut pieces of wood in the shape of flowers were found in a park?" And she probably threw away my paints as well. But I couldn't say anything about it. The second pattern was about meals. When we started living together. "And, do you have any foods you dislike?" Karen asked me. Without much thought, I honestly answered, "I'm not fond of fried food." Then, despite saying, "You might not like it, but..." she would serve fried food 3 times a week. However, honestly, the second issue doesn't bother me much. Indeed, I'm not a fan of fried food, but in truth, Karen is an excellent cook. The meals she prepared were all incredibly delicious. My parents were not only extremely poor but also terrible cooks. Unfortunately, it seems children do inherit their parents' traits, and I, too, am awful at cooking. There was a time I aimed to overcome this weakness, but seeing no signs of improvement, I decided to give up. On the other hand, Karen could easily be mistaken for a professional chef, and if her boastful tales are to be believed, she once ran a cooking class.
I had to stop because I couldn't find students who could keep up with my level,
she claimed, though I suspect she may have harassed her students. Anyway, the fact remains that Karen's cooking is excellent. I said I disliked fried foods, but that was based solely on what I had at home. About 80% of the fried foods served for dinner was frozen, and the remaining 20% were discounted deli items from the supermarket. The cold deli was particularly unpleasant. Raised on such fare, it's no surprise I can't make decent fried food. My one attempt at fried chicken ended up burnt on the outside and raw on the inside, nearly causing stomach upset, so I vowed never to fry anything again. But Karen's is different. Her fried chicken, especially, is a masterpiece, crispy on the outside, juicy on the inside, with perfect seasoning. I could eat it endlessly. Karen excels at any fried dish, all of them of professional quality. As much as I repeat it, Karen intended it as harassment, so there seemed no point in correcting her. Each time fried food was served, I would rub my stomach, stand up, and sometimes cover my mouth as if I was going to be sick. Seeing this, Karen would ask, "What's wrong? Are you feeling ill?" Her words were concerned, but her face was clearly pleased. Interestingly, Karen never serves fried food when her husband, Michael, is present.
It's not good for the health. It would be terrible if Michael's health were compromised, right?
And me? That goes without saying. I've always been too thin, often told I should gain some weight, so eating Karen's fried food was hardly a problem for me. As for Michael, having grown up eating Karen's delicious meals, he's quite overweight. So, Karen's precautions seem entirely reasonable. After a year of pretending to dislike the fried food, disaster struck. Karen accidentally spilled coffee on a toll painting I had spent 6 months completing, ruining it.
I'm so sorry. I think I saw something similar on a flea market app, so I'll buy it for you later,
she said, and I finally lost my temper. That night, with Michael and my FAL Bob working late, dinner was just Karen and me. As expected, she served fried food, and I finally told her off.
Karen, you may have been trying to harass me by serving fried food, which I said I disliked, but it was all incredibly delicious to me. Thank you so much for making the effort to annoy me.
Karen responded. For 45 years since I got married, I've been cooking non-stop, but neither Bob nor Michael ever said my food was delicious. Now, hearing it from and I realize what I've always wanted was just a simple delicious. Thank you, thank you. Hearing that made me think. Come to think of it, Michael always seems to eat my cooking with a look of displeasure. Have I ever heard a word of praise from Michael? No, never. Well, I suppose there's some semblance of affection for Michael, so I've tried my best to cook despite my lack of skill. However, Michael always seems to eat as if he dislikes the food. Sometimes, he even has an expression that says he doesn't want to eat anymore. Come to think of it. Is it delicious? Have I ever asked him? I believe he said, "It's not bad, right?" I'm the one asking. If it's bad, just say it's bad. As I was mulling over these thoughts, years of pent-up frustrations began to pour out of Karen. And they kept coming.
Bob has never taken the initiative to do any household chores. Michael has never helped out on his own since he was little. They'll do it if asked, but both are so bad at it, it's easier if I just do it myself. When they come home, jackets are left wherever they're removed. They don't know the first thing about tidying up. I'm not a housekeeper.
As I listened, I started to get really annoyed. Really annoyed. Indeed, Michael seems to have inherited Bob's traits. Even now, at his age, he leaves his jacket wherever. He doesn't tidy up at all. It's been 2 years since we got married, and I'm already fed up. Karen endured this for 45 years. No wonder she'd resort to petty revenge to vent her frustrations.
Michael, Bob, how come you never say thank you or that the meal is delicious after someone makes you dinner?
Cooking is a wife's job. Why should I have to say thanks? Right, Michael? Yeah. Besides, even if we don't say it, we think it's delicious, so it's fine. My anger exploded at their complaints.
Cooking is a wife's job? Nowadays, it's normal for spouses to share household duties. Even if the wife takes the lead because she's a stay-at-home wife, you should still say thank you. Michael. I think so, so it's understood? What's that about? Michael, when you come home, if I don't say welcome back, you get grumpy, right? How is that any different?
Usually playing the role of a modest wife, my sudden intensity shocked both Michael and Bob. But they still seemed unconvinced, tilting their heads in confusion. I'm asking you to speak properly, aren't I? Fed up to the point of refusing to speak further.
Enough is enough. Until you change your attitudes, I'm going to stop cooking. Karen, you don't have to cook either,
I said. True to my word. I boycotted cooking from that day on. For dinner, I'd just put instant ramen on the table before locking myself in my room when Michael got home from work. Watching from afar, Michael was just eating the ramen as is. When I asked if it was delicious, "It's not bad, right?" That's enough for me. But then, a miracle happened. Worried about Karen, I visited the in-laws one Sunday, and surprisingly, Michael and Bob came forward to apologize for everything. Shocked by the sudden apology, I asked them what was going on. Michael, utterly unable to grasp why I was angry, apparently mentioned it to a colleague after getting tired of instant ramen.
My wife stopped cooking dinner. Isn't it normal for the wife to take care of meals?
Overheard by female employees.
Normal for the wife? What era are you living in?
So old-fashioned.
Outdated. The worst. Don't you help out at home? Poor Anne.
The women ganged up on him, and he was quite taken aback. I'm truly grateful to those female colleagues. Bob made a similar mistake, seeking agreement from his chess buddy Henry.
Cooking is a wife's job, right? No need to say thanks for that, right? Anne's making a big deal out of nothing, right?
Overheard by Henry's DIL. She was furious. Her reaction was much the same as the female employees, but with even more intensity. Even Henry chimed in.
Bob, times have changed. Nowadays, both men and women do household chores. I do the laundry and cleaning every day.
And he was gently admonished by him. Finally realizing their mistakes, they came to apologize. But when I asked,
"What will you do from now on?"
their response was vague. So, we agreed they would help with chores, say when meals are delicious, and clearly express any dislikes. I made Michael and Bob sign a contract to settle the matter for now. Finally, Bob said to Karen,
"I've been wrong all this time. Your cooking is truly delicious. Please keep it up."
Karen replied,
"It feels like my efforts over the years are finally being recognized,"
and started crying again. When Michael just stared, I glared at him until he said,
"Thank you, Anne."
I decided to take that as a win. Since then, words of thanks and compliments on the food have started to slip out of Michael's mouth. Karen mentioned Bob was doing the same. It turns out Karen's harassment stemmed from her own frustrations with her life with Bob. Once Bob changed his ways, the harassment stopped.
"I'm sorry for using you as an outlet for my stress. Would you teach me toll painting?"
she even asked. There's no reason to refuse, and gaining a hobby partner is a joy for me. Karen, naturally skilled, is making rapid progress. Lately, I've also started learning to cook from Karen. Teaching her daughter to cook was Karen's dream. My cooking skills are improving, and it feels great to be able to give back.